Hey everyone, welcome back. Today, we're diving into an exciting new story. What if Naruto was Aizen's reincarnation? Before we jump in, I just want to apologize for the delay. I had to deal with some university stuff, exams and all that, so thanks for being patient. I know a lot of you have been waiting, and I'm excited to finally bring it to you. Now, just a heads up, this story is still ongoing and isn't complete yet. It's going to be a two-part story, totaling around 2.5 hours, and I'll keep you updated as new chapters come out. Big shout out to my boy KZ1818 for this story. His link is in the description, so go show him some love. And if you could take a second to hit that subscribe button and drop a like on this video, it would mean a lot. It really helps the channel grow and keeps me motivated to bring you more content like this. Alright, let's get into it. In Mukin, the silence in Mukin was as absolute as Aizen's boredom. 19,900 years left. He mused aloud, mocking his remaining sentence as if it were a mere trifle. Without warning, he was pulled into his inner world, finding himself face to face with the Hogyoku. Returning to your master at last? Aizen's tone held no gratitude, only expectation. Not quite, replied the Hogyoku with an edge of disdain. Consider this pity. Aizen's gaze sharpened. I have no need for your pity, and yet you long for freedom. The Hogyoku continued, ignoring his words. I could grant you that. Aizen's mind turned, calculating. What would you gain from such generosity? Call it a farewell gift from your servant, my pitiful master. I'll send you to another world. The Hogyoku, Aizen's lip curled in faint amusement. A parting gift? Another world. A spark of anticipation lit his gaze. Another world. A fresh host of lives to entertain him. Then this is goodbye, master. The Hogyoku's voice faded as it began to glow, sending Aizen spiraling into an unfamiliar world. In the Naruto world, Aizen awoke, eyes focusing on a surreal sight. A colossal fox, its 9 tails thrashing in fury, impaling 2 figures as if skewering flies. Behind it stood the spectral Shinigami, its tanto poised to strike. A woman's voice trembled in the air, soft yet filled with resolve. Naruto, don't be picky, eat well, grow strong. The woman's words drifted in and out as she imparted her final wishes to her newborn son, braving unimaginable pain with every word. Her husband looked on, his voice calm despite the desperation in his eyes. Our son, Naruto. His words faded and the ceiling began. So? Aizen realized with sudden clarity. So, the Hogyoku reincarnated me. Kushina's gaze fell on Hiruzen, standing just outside the barrier. Promise me you'll care for him, she implored, her last wish hanging in the air. Hiruzen nodded solemnly. I promise. With that, Kushina's strength gave way, her barrier dissolving as her final breath slipped away. The Kyuubi's energy subsided, the Shinigami sealing it within Aizen's new form, and Minato and Kushina's lifeless bodies crumbled to the ground. When Hiruzen approached, lifting the newborn into his arms, he glanced around, meeting the eyes of the surrounding shinobi. No one will speak of what happened here tonight. Council room. The emotions were impossible to contain. Grief for the lives lost, relief for the safety of the child they had left behind. All were woven into Hiruzen's heart as he held the newborn in his arms. But he was forced to bury those feelings as he resumed his position as Hokage. Sitting in his seat, he observed the elders and clan heads who filled the room, each one of them a picture of unease and expectation. He silenced the room with a hand and pointed to Shikaku Nara. We've lost nearly a third of our forces, Shikaku reported soberly. Most of the Jounin survived, but our Genin and Chunin numbers have taken a critical hit. The academy was destroyed, but with enough manpower, we'll rebuild. Prepare a full report by tomorrow, Hiruzen commanded. He turned next to Fugaku Uchiha, head of the Uchiha clan. Fugaku-sama, during the attack, I noticed a distinct lack of Uchiha manpower. Hiruzen. Fugaku responded, Hokage-sama, the majority of the Uchiha clan was concerned with evacuating civilians before entering the battle. When you look at Nara-san's report tomorrow, I am sure that you will find the names of 2 or 3 dozen Uchiha that died. As he spoke, there was the smallest hint of irritation in his voice, showing that he was not happy with his clan being questioned. Danzo interrupted, as expected. Yet, with the Sharingan's power, wouldn't it have been better to? Fugaku cut him off with chilling clarity. The Kyuubi can only be controlled by the Manjikyu Sharingan. No Uchiha currently possesses that power. Hiruzen moved on. Next question. Since you've resumed your position as Hokage, are we to assume? Hayashi hesitated, but Hiruzen nodded before he could finish. The fourth is gone, Hiruzen confirmed, the grief heavy in his voice. Danzo was the next to speak, his tone a precise blade. What became of the Kyuubi? As we know, the tailed beasts are immortal. Hiruzen sighed inwardly, suppressing his frustration. The answer is right here, he said, pulling back the bundle's covering to reveal Aizen's face. The clan heads collectively recoiled. Despite his newborn appearance, Aizen's eyes held a penetrating, chillingly condescending gaze that unsettled even the most hardened shinobi. Those eyes, Shikaku muttered, feeling as if he were under the scrutiny of something far more ancient and dangerous than a mere child. Danzo leaned forward, his ambition unmasked. Hokage-sama, let me take him under my wing. I'll teach him to control the Kyuubi's power and turn him into a weapon worthy of. At that, Aizen glared directly at Danzo, a look that belied his infant form. His intellect and disdain were unmistakable, and it left even the hardened tactician speechless. Extraordinary, Shikaku thought, his mind racing. This infant, he understands us. But Hiruzen refused Danzo's request. When Fugaku offered to raise Aizen within the Uchiha clan, Hiruzen again declined, wary of the inevitable power imbalance this would cause among the clans. Naruto, he decided, will be raised in the village's orphanage. This old man has broken his promise to my mother. Aizen mused, eyes narrowing. How quaint, but he hid his thoughts, biding his time. Soon enough, he thought with a smile, the ants will learn what it means to defy a god. Aizen's inner world. That night, as his infant body drifted into sleep, he awoke in his inner world, where Kyoka Suigetsu greeted him. But he wasn't alone. The Kyuubi, seething and fierce, glared at him from within a cage. The beast growled, murderous intent clear in its crimson eyes. Open this cage, whelp, it snarled. Let me tear you to pieces. Aizen only chuckled, his voice resonating with an authority that made even the Kyuubi hesitate. Foolish creature, he said, voice dripping with disdain. You dare to look down upon a god? His spiritual pressure intensified, crushing down upon the Kyuubi like an avalanche, forcing the beast to its knees despite its raw power. How can this infant possess such an aura? The Kyuubi thought, trapped in the weight of Aizen's spirit. A pity? Aizen sneered, his voice echoing through the chamber. But you will serve me obediently. The Kyuubi, for the second time, felt fear. 13 years later, the figure known as Aizen sat chained to a chair, his body covered in intricate sealing formulas. Every inch of him, from his chakra network to his vision, was suppressed and locked away by powerful fuinjutsu. The light in the cell barely reached him, casting shadows that seemed to accentuate the regal indifference in his gaze. You might wonder, how did Aizen come to this point? Let me explain. As a child, Aizen was almost courteous. He extended a strange kindness to those around him, more as an afterthought than a natural gesture. But in his first year at the academy, when the villagers discovered his status as a Jinchuriki, everything shifted. They labeled him a monster, avoiding him and treating him with open hostility. Aizen decided to embrace their view. Anyone who dared glance at him with disdain or voiced their contempt was met with punishment. With nothing more than a look, Aizen would ensnare them in his illusions. Within these illusions, Aizen mentally broke them, peeling back their sanity layer by agonizing layer. As his name spread in whispers, the villagers came to fear him even more, pushing Hiruzen to confront him directly. Hiruzen intervened to try and curb the boy's behavior, demanding he cease these torturous games. Aizen responded simply, trapping Hiruzen himself in an illusion, a cruel masterpiece in which Hiruzen watched, helpless, as Aizen killed everyone the old man loved over and over. It was only when Hiruzen, reduced to a pleading shell, screamed for release that Aizen ended it. Hiruzen, horrified, asked how Aizen could relish such torment. The boy's smile was chilling. "Consider yourselves lucky," he replied. "Ants like you should be grateful for the honor of looking upon a god." Realizing he couldn't make the boy stop, Hiruzen decided to have Aizen imprisoned. Surprisingly, Aizen offered no resistance. During his confinement, Aizen was still afforded a rudimentary education, though Irika, his instructor, was strictly prohibited from teaching him jutsu, providing only an understanding of their mechanics. The boy had other visitors. Hiruzen came to observe. The Ikarakus would occasionally visit to support the boy, Shikaku and Shikamaru, who often challenged him to shogi, and Inoichi served as his therapist, though it's questionable how much Aizen revealed of himself. Present day, Restricted Facility Intelligence Division. This facility was where the worst of the worst were held. Kakashi, Shino, and Hinata had just arrived there, each wondering about their purpose in such a bleak location. Shino voiced his curiosity, asking why they were here. Kakashi's answer was blunt. They were here to retrieve their teammate. Shino and Hinata exchanged a shocked look. Having a criminal as a teammate was the last thing they expected. When they reached Aizen's cell, both Shino and Hinata failed to recognize the boy they once knew. Though they had shared a brief 3 months at the academy, this figure exuded an aura of something otherworldly. Without looking up, Aizen greeted Hinata, his words relayed by his spiritual pressure. Hinata flinched, but the familiarity in his voice stirred a memory. "Naruto," she whispered, unsure. Long ago, he had once saved her from bullies, leaving her with the words, "The strong bully the weak serve the strong." He told her to become strong enough to conquer others. She hadn't forgotten him. Shino's eyes widened at hearing the name. Naruto. He hadn't seen the boy since he disappeared 6 years prior. Aizen finally glanced their way, a spark of amusement in his eyes. "To what do I owe this visit?" he asked, his voice dripping with disdain. Kakashi stepped forward, unfazed. "I have orders from the Hokage for your release. From this moment on, you're to serve as a shinobi of the leaf." Aizen chuckled, his tone laced with mockery. "Why would I ever lower myself to serve that insect you call Hokage?" Hinata and Shino could hardly believe his audacity in referring to the Hokage with such contempt. Kakashi, however, had been briefed on Aizen's delusions of godhood, his unrivaled illusionary prowess, and his genius. "It's a fair deal," Kakashi countered. "You'll regain your freedom in exchange for your service to the leaf." The amusement in Aizen's expression darkened. "Little ant, do not be so presumptuous." His voice lowered, carrying a cold bite. "If I wanted to leave, I could have done so long ago." With a flicker of power, the seal on his left eye broke. His gaze alone filled the room with a fierce, overwhelming disgust, and Kakashi, Shino, and Hinata felt an unnatural chill in their bones. The air thickened with his presence, their knees buckling under an unseen weight. Satisfied with their reactions, Aizen closed his eye, sighing theatrically. "Fine, I'll play along." "Excellent," Kakashi said, concealing his relief. Moving closer, Kakashi reached out to release Aizen's bindings. But before he could act, Aizen dismantled several seals himself, leaving most of the chakra suppression seals, paralysis seals, and the one over his right eye. Even with most of his power restrained, the spiritual pressure emanating from him made their skin crawl. "Pathetic," Aizen remarked, the barest hint of a smile on his lips. "This isn't even a fraction of my power." With that, he stepped out of the cell, glancing back impatiently. "Are we going? Or would you rather stay groveling?" The three of them snapped out of their thoughts, their lingering fear morphing into a wary respect as they followed Aizen out into the open world once more. As Team 7 walked through the village, all eyes were fixed on Aizen. His unique attire, a dark, fitted cloak that fell to his ankles, paired with an eye patch over his right eye, made him anything but inconspicuous. Civilians and shinobi alike cast wary, uncertain glances. Aizen's mere presence stirred something primal in them. Fear, curiosity, and an unsettling respect. They didn't recognize the boy. His gaze, cool and razor-sharp, swept over the onlookers with disdain. The child they once feared was now a mystery cloaked in an aura of quiet menace. A stranger who held himself as though he walked above them all. Aizen's lips curled into a slight smirk, barely concealing his contempt for their weak minds and fragile lives. Beneath that stare, few dared hold his gaze. At Training Ground 7, when they arrived, Kakashi took out 2 small silver bells, dangling them provocatively before the 3. "These bells," Kakashi began, "will decide your futures. Only 2 of you can pass, and the one left without a bell returns to the academy." His voice took on a steely edge. "In Naruto's case, he'll be sent back to his cell." A flicker of surprise crossed Shino and Hinata's faces, but Aizen's smirk only deepened, his interest piqued by Kakashi's challenge. Kakashi set a clock on a nearby stump, its second hand ticking ominously, each movement amplifying the tension in the air. "Oh, and one last thing," Kakashi added, his voice calm but his gaze wary. "Come at me with the intent to kill." Aizen's smile widened, as if he were savoring a private joke. Kakashi caught a brief glimmer in Aizen's lone eye, and a chill swept down his spine. It wasn't the first time he'd faced dangerous opponents, but this was different. Aizen's aura felt intense, as though it held lifetimes of power and menace, compressed into a single being. "To you, Naruto," Kakashi continued, cautious now, "I have one restriction: no illusions." Aizen's expression didn't shift, but he inclined his head slightly, accepting the limitation without protest. He seemed almost amused by it. With that, Kakashi signaled the start of the test, and the 3 genin dispersed like shadows across the training ground. Shino, thoughtful as ever, moved quietly into the cover of the trees. His mind raced, analyzing every possible angle of the test. He was determined to uncover the meaning behind this trial. The true purpose of the exercise couldn't be as straightforward as capturing the bells. There had to be a catch. Hinata activated her Byakugan, the veins around her eyes pulsing as she scanned for her teammates. She quickly found Shino, his gaze intense. The 2 exchanged silent nods, and Shino explained his thoughts on the test's hidden purpose, laying out Kakashi's likely intentions. "This isn't about passing or failing," Shino murmured. "It's about teamwork." Hinata's eyes widened, her gaze flickering toward Aizen's general direction. "Then, we have to work together," she whispered. They began to search for Aizen, and after a short while, they found him. Leaning casually against the trunk of a tree, he seemed more like an indifferent observer than an active participant. His left eye was closed, his face tilted skyward, as though the entire affair bored him. It was impossible to tell whether he was aware of their presence or simply unconcerned with it. Without even opening his eye, Aizen's voice broke the silence. "So," he drawled, his tone laced with a subtle mockery, "have you figured it out yet?" Shino nodded, his expression unfazed by Aizen's sharp gaze. "We believe the true purpose of the test is to assess our cooperation as a team." Aizen's eye finally opened, glinting with a flicker of interest. "Good," he murmured. "Then, we can start discussing our plan of attack." Shino and Hinata settled in as Aizen straightened, his demeanor shifting slightly, signaling that he was ready to engage. They began to lay out their strengths and capabilities, speaking in low tones. Shino started, glancing between Hinata and Aizen. "My specialty is insect-based techniques. My insects can drain an enemy's chakra, locate targets, jam sensory abilities, and even form barriers or clones for diversion. My taijutsu is adequate, though I prefer long-range tactics." Hinata nodded with quiet determination as Shino continued. "I can also set traps and create distractions, ideal for situations where teamwork is critical. My strength lies in tactics." After Shino finished, the group's attention shifted to Hinata, who clasped her hands nervously before speaking. I have the Byakugan, which allows me to see chakra pathways and potential weaknesses. With the gentle fist, I can target an opponent's chakra points, disrupting their abilities. My style is mostly close range, so I'll need one of you to cover me if we face mid or long-range attacks." When it was Aizen's turn, he regarded them with an almost patronizing expression, as though humoring children. "My illusions aside," he began with a faint smirk, "you may consider me versatile." Shino, unperturbed, pressed for more details. "We need specifics, Naruto. How can we use your strengths most effectively in a coordinated attack?" Aizen uncrossed his arms as he grunted, "I'm very proficient in taijutsu and kenjutsu," he stated without a hint of modesty. "My speed is unmatched, and I can use Kido spells to bind, attack, and defend. Also, I have immense physically strength." His words hung in the air, daring them to challenge his claims. Hinata and Shino exchanged glances. Their initial unease about Aizen was starting to morph into something more complex. His aura was unlike anyone they had ever encountered, his words carrying an assurance that bordered on arrogance. Yet, his proficiency hinted at a strength that was undeniably real. After agreeing on a rough plan, they moved out together. They found Kakashi waiting in the clearing, his nose buried in his infamous orange book. He barely glanced up as they approached, as though completely unconcerned by their presence. Shino, Hinata, and Aizen fanned out, preparing to engage him on multiple fronts. Without looking away from his book, Kakashi called out, "Remember, only 2 of you will be taking bells. Whoever doesn't goes back to the academy. And Naruto, failure means back to your cell." Aizen's lips curved into a slight smile. "Is that supposed to intimidate me, Kakashi?" Kakashi snapped his book shut, his expression hardening into a steely gaze. "We'll see," he said coolly, then signaled the start of the test. Immediately, Shino's insects surged forward, swarming Kakashi from all directions. Kakashi dodged effortlessly, his Sharingan tracing each movement. But as he sidestepped, he became aware of Hinata approaching from his blind spot, her Byakugan active as she prepared a series of gentle fist strikes aimed at his chakra points. Kakashi leaped backward, narrowly avoiding Hinata's palms. He shifted his weight to one side just as Shino's insects formed a thick, spiraling cage around him, attempting to restrict his movements. With a flash of steel, Kakashi brandished his tanto, slicing through the cloud of insects and dispersing them. "Interesting teamwork," he acknowledged, his tone almost admiring. But his attention shifted quickly as he sensed Aizen's approach. With a flash of Shuinpa, Aizen appeared before him, his sword already spawned. Kakashi moved his own tanto into a defensive stance, barely managing to parry as Aizen's blade bore down on him with unrelenting force. Their swords clashed with a piercing ring that echoed through the clearing, sending sparks flying from the sheer pressure of Aizen's attack. Aizen's speed was astounding. Each movement was precise, calculated. He struck with deadly accuracy, his blade a blur of silver arcs. Kakashi countered as best he could, his Sharingan tracing the rapid shifts in Aizen's stance. But the sheer speed of Aizen's strikes was almost overwhelming. Aizen's mastery of kenjutsu was unlike anything Kakashi had ever encountered, each swing carrying a lethal intent that made him realize he could not afford to underestimate Aizen. In a brief pause between strikes, Kakashi's eye narrowed as he caught sight of Aizen's smirk. There was no doubt in his mind now. Aizen was toying with him. Kakashi tightened his grip on his tanto, switching his strategy. Their swords clashed again, but this time, Kakashi moved in close. Aizen met his assault head-on, his movements flowing seamlessly between offense and defense. Their strikes grew faster, each parry and counter becoming a blur of steel and intent. Kakashi's Sharingan began to track Aizen's subtle shifts in stance, his grip tightening as he anticipated the next blow. But just as Kakashi thought he had an opening, Aizen's free hand shot out, delivering a precise palm strike to Kakashi's chest. The force sent him skidding backward, his feet digging into the ground to regain balance. "Not bad," Kakashi admitted, a hint of a grin breaking his composure. He knew Aizen was restricted from using his illusions, but the ferocity of his physical skills alone was impressive. Aizen's response was a cool, almost dismissive smile. "Perhaps you should take me more seriously, Kakashi." Meanwhile, Shino had maneuvered into position with Hinata, watching the exchange with critical eyes. Kakashi's attention was momentarily fixed on Aizen, giving them an opportunity. They moved in unison, Shino launching another wave of insects while Hinata rushed in, her palms aglow with chakra. Kakashi noticed the incoming attack, quickly shifting his stance to deflect Hinata's gentle fist strikes, while his Tanto kept Aizen at bay. The three closed in around him, forcing him to divide his attention. For the first time, Kakashi looked genuinely pressured. He leaped back, putting distance between himself and his three attackers. Shino's insects reformed, circling Kakashi in a dense swarm, while Aizen and Hinata prepared to flank him from opposite sides. Kakashi quickly assessed his options. If he continued focusing on each one individually, he would quickly find himself overwhelmed. He needed to break their formation and fast. Reaching into his pouch, Kakashi threw a volley of shuriken, aiming to disrupt their positioning. Shino's insects swarmed forward, intercepting the projectiles, while Aizen walked through the shower of projectiles. Hinata, undeterred, utilized her Byakugan, keeping her sights trained on Kakashi's movements. The next moments were a blur. Aizen moved in with a renewed intensity, closing the distance and launching into another series of sword strikes. Kakashi blocked the initial blows, but as he tried to counter, Aizen's speed doubled, his strikes becoming nearly impossible to follow. In a final move, Aizen twisted his wrist, redirecting his blade in a sudden arc toward Kakashi's shoulder. Kakashi sidestepped, barely evading the strike, but Aizen was relentless. He spun, bringing his blade around in a wide sweep that forced Kakashi to parry. The force of the impact sent a shock up Kakashi's arm, his Sharingan darting to Aizen's face, where he found a smirk of undeniable satisfaction. "Impressive," Kakashi muttered, though he couldn't shake the feeling that Aizen was still holding back. With a flick of his wrist, Aizen returned Kyoka Suigetsu to his soul. He stepped back and signaled for Hinata and Shino to move in. As Kakashi prepared for their next move, he couldn't help but feel a sense of unease. They were adapting quickly, and their coordination was sharper than he anticipated. If he wasn't careful, this test might end with a surprising outcome. 6 years ago, the air was thick with tension as Aizen, bound in heavy iron chains and sealing tags, was escorted into the Intelligence Division's restricted prison. The metallic clink of chains echoed against the cold stone walls, and the faint shimmer of seals pulsed around him. His movements were limited, but his gaze carried a glint of something indomitable, a quiet power simmering beneath the surface. He was assigned a warden, a seasoned shinobi. After days of staring into Aizen's cold, unyielding eyes, he fell prey to the subtle illusions laced in Aizen's Reiatsu. The warden's mind started to fray, paranoia creeping into every corner of his psyche until he finally broke. The Hokage's response was swift. 3 ANBU were stationed to watch over the boy. Among the 3 ANBU, one regarded Aizen with undisguised hatred. His eyes narrowed with a personal grudge, a grudge born of losing someone close in the Nine Tails rampage years ago. "Why doesn't the Hokage just kill this demon brat and be done with it?" he muttered in barely contained anger. Aizen's gaze shifted, almost lazily, toward the ANBU who had spoken. "An ant that dares to speak," he said, his voice silken yet mocking. The anger in the man's eyes burned hotter. Before he could retort, he found himself trapped within Aizen's illusion, a nightmare where the Nine Tails tore his loved one apart, over and over again. His screams echoed through the prison, piercing and filled with despair, until another ANBU member stepped forward, Tanto drawn and pointed at Aizen. "If you don't release him, I'll kill you," the ANBU growled, his voice laced with deadly intent. Aizen smirked, tilting his head in mock compliance. "Go ahead," he replied coolly, "but think carefully. The Hokage would be furious if you killed Konoha's precious war deterrent." The words dripped with derision, each one a calculated jab. Reluctantly, the ANBU sheathed his Tanto, lifting his comrade from the ground and vanishing in a flurry of leaves. Aizen calmly snapped the chains, brushing off the now ineffective seals. The last ANBU sank to his knees, the weight of Aizen's presence pressing down on him. "Relax," Aizen murmured, stepping forward. "I have no quarrel with you. Deliver a message to the Hokage. Tell him he needs increase the power of the seals." Disturbed by the incident, Hiruzen summoned Jiraiya back to the village. A look of sorrow darkened Jiraiya's features as he was briefed on Aizen's descent into darkness. When he finally approached Aizen's cell, he found the boy seated cross-legged, meditating. "You must be here to play stronger seals?" Aizen commented, not even glancing up, as if Jiraiya's arrival was an expected nuisance. Jiraiya remained silent, grappling with the emotions roiling within him. Took him a moment to find his voice. "Your parents would be disappointed to see what you've become, Naruto." Aizen opened his eyes, glancing at Jiraiya with the faintest hint of amusement. "My parents were privileged," he murmured with a cruel twist to his smile. "To give birth to a god. That is an honor few would ever know." Jiraiya's mouth pressed into a thin line, unwilling to dignify the boy's words with a response. He completed the resealing process, each one laid down with an unspoken sorrow. A week later, Aizen lay chained in his cell, his vision and mouth sealed alongside his chakra. In the shadows, a figure slipped into the room, a man with a swirling mask obscuring his face. The masked man stilled as Aizen's presence rippled through the air. "Welcome," Aizen's voice echoed softly, though his mouth was covered, "to my humble abode." Toby chuckled, intrigued by this silent communication. "You're full of surprises, aren't you, brat?" "There's little about me that would surprise you," Aizen replied smoothly, his ryatsu lacing the air with intense disdain. Toby tilted his head, his tone shifting to something more calculating. "You know, the villagers despise you. The Hokage keeps you locked away. But I understand what you are, something beyond them. If you were to join my organization, the Akatsuki, we could give you a purpose. A true place among the powerful." Aizen's eyes seemed to glint with an almost amused interest. "You believe I would accept the invitation of a masked fool who hides in the dark?" Unfazed, Toby leaned in closer. "Consider it a way to show them all who truly deserves power." Aizen's voice dropped to a low, mocking murmur. "An ant inviting a god to play among insects." Toby's hand twitched, but he managed to chuckle. "Suit yourself," he said as he turned to leave. "But I think you'll change your mind in time." Aizen watched him go, the faintest ghost of a smirk tugging at his lips. Days later, Danzo strode into Aizen's cell, his footsteps even and confident. He surveyed Aizen, his gaze calculating. Aizen's voice floated through the silence, laced with contempt. "You've yet to give up on making me your tool, old man?" Danzo's brows knitted in surprise. Aizen's mouth was sealed. He was also shocked that boy remembered what happened when he was an infant. "Aizen tells the ant to leave or else he will be crushed." Danzo chuckled at the boy's condescending tone. Danzo quickly activated the Sharingan in his right eye, focusing on placing Aizen under his control. Aizen chuckled low and dark. "The Ninetales has informed me that you're attempting to use genjutsu on me," he sneered. "Pathetic." Danzo's face twisted with irritation, but before he could counter, a crushing wave of ryatsu filled the cell. The air seemed to burn, pressing down on him as if he were being consumed by flames. "I warned you, old man." Aizen's voice dripped with a quiet malice. "Leave if you don't wish to be crushed." As Danzo's body trembled under the relentless pressure, he used a substitution technique, vanishing and leaving another prisoner in his place. Aizen released his hold, muttering to himself that perhaps Danzo had learned his lesson. The Hokage entered Aizen's cell later, his gaze falling on the prisoner lying at Aizen's feet, a crater indented beneath him. Hiruzen sighed and dragged the man back to his cell. Once awake, the prisoner had no memory of what transpired, intensifying Hiruzen's concern. Returning to Aizen, he released the seal on his mouth and questioned him, but Aizen feigned innocence. Though unconvinced, Hiruzen tightened security yet again. In a bid to understand the boy, Hiruzen assigned Inoichi as Aizen's therapist. But their sessions quickly devolved into Aizen's haughty proclamations of godhood and him being superior to all the ants. Shikaku tagged along on one of these sessions. With him, he brought a shogi board. As they played, Shikaku asked if Aizen remembered the events of his birth. To his surprise, Aizen confirmed it all. The council meeting, Danzo's attempt to claim him, Fugaku's adoption plea. Shikaku hid his amusement as Aizen announced his moves, winning the game with calculated ease. "Perhaps I'll bring my son next time," Shikaku mused. Inoichi raised an eyebrow, silently questioning his friend's nonchalance. Back to the present. Kakashi's stance was relaxed, yet his visible eye glimmered with renewed focus. He was testing them, not just physically but mentally, probing to see how they would handle an enemy who could adapt to their every move. After a quiet moment, he sighed, almost disappointed. "You're good, but I hope you weren't expecting that to be enough." In a flash, Kakashi formed a series of hand seals, too quick for most eyes to follow. Earth release, mud wall. With a rumbling eruption, a towering earthen barrier rose between him and the team, obstructing their line of sight. Shino signaled to Hinata, who used her Byakugan. Her gaze saw through the wall with ease. She could see Kakashi's chakra flickering as he moved just behind the structure, setting up his next move. "He's preparing something," Hinata whispered to her teammates. Aizen remained calm, his gaze sharp. "Then we'll have to apply some pressure." With a slight motion of his fingers, he raised his arm, pointing at the mud wall. Heido number 33, Sokatsui. A blast of blue fire burst from his palm, illuminating the area as it crashed into the wall with explosive force. The impact shattered Kakashi's defensive barrier, sending chunks of earth in every direction. Aizen's Ryatsu still lingered in the air, a heavy, oppressive force that Kakashi couldn't ignore. But Kakashi was already on the move, leaping from behind the crumbling wall and landing a safe distance away. As his feet touched the ground, he raised his hands once more. Fire release, Great Fireball Jutsu. A roaring sphere of flames erupted from his mouth, hurtling toward the team with blistering heat. The flame's intensity distorted the air, casting flickering shadows around the clearing. Aizen's Ryatsu rised as he prepared another technique. He didn't know if it would work, but still went through with it. Water release, Tearing Torrent. A spinning stream of water surged around him. The water collided with the incoming fireball. Steam exploded from the impact, creating a thick fog that momentarily obscured their surroundings. Shino nodded to himself, pleased at the timing, as his insects poured forth, moving into the mist in silent waves. Kakashi's Sharingan could detect chakra, but the dense fog made it difficult to identify specific sources. The insects moved quietly, forming an almost invisible net, intending to surround and disorient Kakashi. The plan seemed to work. Kakashi shifted uncomfortably as he sensed the subtle, encroaching chakra of Shino's insects. But his eyes remained sharp, tracking any flicker of movement. Before he could react further, Aizen's voice cut through the haze. "Bakud alamaya reli ne hainawa." A glowing rope of energy shot forward, binding Kakashi's movements, restricting his arms and torso. Though Kakashi struggled against the Kido binding, Aizen's technique held firm, its energy pulsing in rhythm with Aizen's Ryatsu. "Your teamwork is improving," Kakashi admitted, even as he felt the tightening restraint around his body. But he wasn't finished. A quick surge of his chakra cracked the Kido's hold, and with a swift leap, he broke free, landing a few feet away. His stance shifted, signaling his readiness for the next move. Wind release, Gale Palm. Kakashi's voice echoed as he thrust his hands forward, unleashing a powerful gust that dispersed the mist and the insects swarming him. The sudden force forced the team to brace themselves, Hinata covering her eyes while Shino's insects scattered, momentarily losing their cohesion. Aizen merely held his ground, a faint smile gracing his lips. As Kakashi's gale subsided, he gestured, almost tauntingly. "Is that all, Kakashi?" Kakashi's eyes narrowed. He was beginning to realize that Aizen's confidence wasn't just arrogance. It was an unshakable belief in his own abilities. That calm, unsettling smile seemed to invite Kakashi to give his best, as if he were the one being tested. "Very well," Kakashi muttered. His hands moved swiftly into another sequence of seals. Lightning release, Lightning Beast Tracking Fong. A fierce bolt of lightning arced from his hand, forming into the shape of a snarling hound that lunged toward Aizen with electrifying speed. The beasts were a dangerous technique, designed to home in on the target's chakra, locking onto Aizen's position with lethal accuracy. Aizen's expression didn't waver. He raised his palm, his voice calm and focused. "Heido number 63, Raikoho." A crackling beam of yellow energy shot forth, meeting Kakashi's lightning beast head-on. The two attacks collided with a deafening explosion, sending electric arcs and residual energy tearing through the air. The shockwave pushed back the team, each of them bracing themselves against the intensity. Kakashi's eye narrowed, scanning the smoke for any sign of Aizen. But even with his Sharingan, the overwhelming Ryatsu made it difficult to gauge Aizen's exact location. And then, without warning, Aizen was in front of him, emerging from the dissipating smoke. His eyes held a glint of amusement as he studied Kakashi's surprised expression. Kakashi shifted his weight, his stance becoming defensive as Aizen's Ryatsu flared around him. "You're impressive, Naruto, but this test isn't over." Aizen tilted his head, almost mockingly. "Oh, I wouldn't dream of it, Kakashi." Kakashi's breath was shallow as he stared down his team, gauging them through narrowed eyes. Training Ground 7 bore the marks of their battle, the earth scorched and littered with broken foliage. Aizen stood confidently, his sharp gaze unwavering. Shino's insects hummed faintly around them, while Hinata's Byakugan remained vigilant. Kakashi took a moment to wipe a trace of blood from his lip. "Well, it seems I'll have to go a little harder on you three. Let's see if you can keep up." Aizen's lip curled into a faint smirk, his eyes glinting with what could only be called amusement. "Keep up? I think it's you who should worry about keeping up, Kakashi." Kakashi's brow twitched at the remark, but he quickly refocused. This was the last round, and he could sense they were preparing something big. "Shino," Aizen commanded calmly, his voice radiating authority. Shino nodded, summoning a massive swarm of insects. The cloud began swirling around them, forming a dark, pulsing veil that acted as both a shield and a screen, obscuring Aizen and his team from view. "Impressive," Kakashi murmured to himself, but he wasn't intimidated. With swift precision, he made several hand seals and muttered, "Fire release, Great Blaze Ball." The massive fireball streaked toward the veil of insects, but Aizen's voice cut through the darkness, calm and assured. "Hado number 58, Tenran." With a casual sweep of his hand, a fierce, spiraling gust burst from his palm, catching Kakashi's fireball midair and redirecting it skyward. The flames dissipated harmlessly above, casting flickering shadows over the battlefield. Kakashi's eyes widened slightly. The boy's Kido intrigued him, but he had no time to dwell on it. Hinata, seizing the distraction, surged forward. She appeared in front of him in an instant, her Byakugan blazing as she executed her strikes. Her fingertips met Kakashi's chakra points with relentless speed and accuracy, each touch weakening his chakra flow. Despite her normally reserved demeanor, her determination was fierce, and Kakashi was forced on the defensive as her assault continued. He grimaced, feeling his chakra stutter and strain under the pressure. She was landing every strike with unnerving accuracy, but he managed to dodge her final attack, leaping back, but it was only to find himself ensnared once again in Aizen's Kido. This time, Aizen's tone was sharper. "Bakudo number 61, Rikujikoro." The 6 radiant bars of light struck from nowhere, pinning Kakashi mid-movement, locking his limbs in place. He struggled against the restraints, but they held firm, fueled by Aizen's potent spiritual energy. Aizen's calm expression didn't falter as he approached. "Stay still, Hataki," he murmured, a hint of disdain in his voice. "You've danced enough." Kakashi's pulse raced. He could feel Shino's insects closing in, a dark wave creeping closer as they filled the space around him. In that split second, he knew he had to act or risk capture. With a deft substitution technique, he vanished, leaving a log in his place as Shino's insects enveloped it. Kakashi reappeared several feet away, crouched low, breathing heavily. He could no longer deny the seriousness of the situation. They were systematically cutting off his options. Aizen's voice echoed through the clearing, smug, as though delivering an undeniable truth. "Running only delays the inevitable," he intoned, his tone almost dismissive. Without a hint of hesitation, Kakashi's hands blurred through another sequence of seals, his eyes fierce. Lightning release, thunderclap. A bolts of lightning formed in the sky. As Kakashi unleashed it on Aizen, he looked almost bored. With a casual raise of his hand, he chanted, Hado number 63, Raikoho. A beam of yellow energy surged from his palm, crashing into Kakashi's lightning. The two forces collided with a resounding explosion that shook the clearing, and Aizen didn't even flinch as the shockwave passed. As the smoke began to clear, Kakashi found himself looking directly at Aizen, who had closed the distance. Aizen's eye held a glint of superiority. Is that it, Kakashi? Or are you simply outmatched? Kakashi clenched his jaw, forcing himself to stay calm. Aizen's power, his arrogance, it was more than unsettling. But he couldn't give up here. He couldn't look weak in front of his other students. Kakashi's body was exhausted, his chakra dangerously low. But seeing the three of them, each one standing firm, resolute, prepared to go to any lengths to subdue him, he knew they had already proven their strength. After a deep breath, Kakashi straightened and looked at them with a rare, genuine smile. All right, you win. The tension broke, and the team allowed themselves a small moment of victory. Kakashi continued, addressing each of them. Naruto, your command over those energy techniques is terrifying, to say the least. Shino, your tactical awareness is something that can't be taught, it's instinct. And Hinata, you surprised me. I could feel every strike you landed. Each of their faces reflected the pride they felt. And then Kakashi added, more solemnly, remember, those who abandon their comrades are worse than scum. Today, you showed that you don't leave each other behind, that you know how to trust each other even under pressure. And in the field, that trust is what will keep you alive. Aizen's expression was unreadable, though a faint smirk remained. The godlike confidence still radiated from him, unshaken. Kakashi dismissed his students and told them they would meet up tomorrow. Shino and Hinata departed. Only Aizen and Kakashi remained, a lingering tension between them. Kakashi's outwardly calm stance was belied by the cautious way he observed Aizen, every instinct in him attuned to the boy's unsettling presence. After a quiet moment, Kakashi tilted his head, the easygoing facade still intact. So, Naruto, what do you need? I wanted to discuss my living arrangements. Am I expected to remain in my cell when not on missions? Or will there be somewhere more fitting provided for my time in Konoha? Aizen, Kakashi's visible eye studied him, the depths of his own thoughts hidden beneath his mask. I'll speak with the Hokage. For now, your cell is where you'll stay. Aizen's face betrayed no sign of disappointment or frustration. He simply gave a small nod, as though he had expected as much. Very well, he replied, his tone as calm and distant as ever. Without another word, he vanished, his Shuinpa carrying him back to his cell with a swiftness Kakashi found unsettling. Only once Aizen's presence had completely dissipated did Kakashi allow himself a slow exhale. His hands relaxed, and he rubbed the back of his neck, trying to dispel the persistent tension that lingered in his muscles. The boy's power, it gnawed at his mind. 6 years, 6 long years in confinement without freedom to move or train. And yet, Aizen had shown strength and precision that seemed beyond natural growth. The sheer force of his movements, his proficiency in kenjutsu, his uncanny mastery of those strange energy-based techniques, none of it added up. He'd seen powerful chakra auras before, but the aura Aizen exuded was different. Its intensity was haunting. Kakashi shook his head, feeling the vague sense of dread creeping in again. He needed to talk to the Hokage. The Hokage's office was quiet by the time Kakashi arrived, a thin wisp of smoke curling up from the pipe in Hiruzen's hand. The other Jonin senseis had already come and gone, having shared their reports on their genin's performance in their respective tests. Kakashi was the last to arrive, as usual, but this time his lateness was weighed down with concern. He moved into the room, and the Hokage looked up, his sharp eyes immediately catching the tension beneath Kakashi's casual demeanor. So, how did it go? Hiruzen asked, his tone calm but curious. He put down his pipe and focused his full attention on Kakashi, sensing this might be more than a routine report. Kakashi took a breath, organizing his thoughts. Team 7 passed, he replied, allowing himself a slight, approving nod. They figured out the true purpose of the test faster than I anticipated. Even more impressive, they worked together seamlessly, something I didn't expect. given that Naruto, Shino, and Hinata have never worked together before. Hiruzen's lips lifted in a small smile, and he chuckled softly. Promising indeed. Those three may just surprise us all. But the Hokage's gaze darkened as his thoughts shifted to Aizen. Tell me, how did Naruto perform? Kakashi hesitated, his expression hardening as he chose his words carefully. He displayed a level of skill and power I hadn't anticipated. Immense strength, remarkable speed, refined kenjutsu. He's proficient in techniques I've never seen before. His mind drifted briefly to the Kido spells Aizen casted. He has these energy-based techniques, Hokage-sama. I've never seen jutsu like them. And his presence, his aura is intense. Overwhelming even. Hiruzen's brows furrowed, his gaze shifting to the distance. No illusions? Kakashi shook his head. I forbade him from using any illusions during the test. He hesitated, his own eyes shadowed with worry. But his kenjutsu alone, it was enough to bring me to my limits. Hiruzen absorbed this, his mind churning as he considered the ramifications. Where did the boy get a sword? He finally asked, his voice carefully controlled. Kakashi's expression tightened. The sword may be a spiritual weapon. He summoned it at will, and just as easily made it vanish once he was done. A faint grimace crossed Hiruzen's face as he considered this. But Kakashi hadn't finished. His voice lowered as he spoke, unable to hide a hint of the sorrow lingering beneath his words. Before I could free him of his bindings, Naruto broke through the seals, Hokage-sama. He kept most of the seals intact, but that isn't enough to stop him. Hiruzen's expression remained neutral, though the shadow behind his eyes deepened. It was unsettling, but not entirely unexpected. 6 years ago, when they had first attempted to restrain Naruto, he had shattered the initial binding seals within days, forcing Hiruzen to call upon Jiraiya's expertise in Fuinjutsu to craft more powerful seals. It had been a necessary yet brutal precaution. For Aizen to break them now, it was a development that filled him with a creeping unease. Silence stretched between the two men, each caught in the weight of their thoughts. After a few moments, Kakashi cleared his throat, breaking the quiet. Naruto raised a question about his living arrangements. He wanted to know if he would continue to stay in his cell, or if something else would be arranged. Hiruzen nodded thoughtfully. Perhaps it's time for a change. He's shown remarkable control, and if he's to be trusted on missions, he'll need a space more suitable than a cell. I'll consider the options. Understood. Kakashi inclined his head, though he couldn't shake the faint knot of apprehension in his gut. But Hiruzen only watched the slow drift of smoke curling up from his pipe, the calculated weight of his gaze fixed on the distance, as though watching the future unfold in the tendrils of smoke. For now, Kakashi, he said softly, continue to watch over him, and if you see anything unusual, you will report it to me immediately. Yes, Hokage-sama. Kakashi turned, his thoughts heavy as he left the office, feeling the quiet dread linger. For years, he had been the one observing Naruto from the shadows. But now, standing face to face with the boy, that dread had become something altogether more tangible. After the test, Shino approaches his father, Shibi, in the secluded garden of the Aburame compound. Father, I need to ask you something. Shino begins, his voice barely above a murmur. Shibi glances up, intrigued by his son's tone. Go ahead, Shino. Shino hesitates, then continues. Did you know that Naruto was imprisoned? The name catches Shibi off guard. His head tilts slightly, eyes narrowing behind dark glasses, as he studies Shino's face. Naruto, Shibi repeats, a flicker of surprise in his voice. Why do you ask about him? Shino adjusts his posture, as though considering his words carefully. Naruto has been freed. He's my teammate. For a long moment, Shibi is silent, absorbing this revelation. He lets out a sigh, his tone subdued. So, Hokage-sama finally released the boy, he murmurs to himself. Shino's curiosity sharpens. Why was Naruto imprisoned in the first place? Shibi glances away, his gaze distant as he recalls a piece of Konoha's past. Naruto's abilities, they were unlike any seen before. He could reach into the minds of others, weaving illusions that could paralyze even experienced shinobi with fear. He terrorized the villagers. The boy refused to stop, even after the Hokage requested it. A faint frown appears on Shino's face as he absorbs the information. So the Hokage made the choice to imprison him? Shibi nods. It was the only way to protect the village from his influence. Shino pauses, glancing down thoughtfully. But then why would Hokage-sama release him, knowing what Naruto is capable of? Shibi folds his arms, his expression unreadable. Because Naruto's presence in the village is crucial. Shino's brows knit together, struggling to understand. Crucial how? Naruto is a war deterrent, Shibi explains, his voice somber. His power is so immense that if he were to die, or if he left the village, the other nations would waste no time in launching an attack on Konoha. As long as Naruto remains here, he acts as a silent threat, a force the other villages dare not provoke. Shino's eyes widen subtly behind his glasses. The weight of his father's words sinks in, a sense of awe mingling with unease. His gaze drifts towards the horizon, a newfound respect for his enigmatic teammates settling within him. To think, Naruto's presence alone is enough to keep other nations in check. Shibi places a steady hand on Shino's shoulder. Be careful around him, Shino. Naruto may be your teammate, but his loyalty lies only with himself. Meanwhile, Hinata stands alone in the grand hall of the Hyuga compound, her hands clasped in front of her as she waits for her father to acknowledge her presence. When Hayashi finally turns his gaze towards her, his expression is one of indifference. You have something to say, Hinata? He asks, his tone curt. Yes, father. She hesitates but gathers her courage. I passed Kakashi-sensei's test. I am officially a genin now. Hayashi's expression remains cold, unimpressed. And did you contribute to your team's success? Or were you simply fortunate to have been carried through? Hinata's gaze falters for a moment, but she nods. I did contribute. We worked as a team. Hayashi barely acknowledges her response, his eyes starting to drift away. But then Hinata mentions her teammates' names. My teammates are Shino, Aburame, and Naruto. The mere mention of Aizen halts Hayashi in his tracks, his entire posture stiffening as his gaze snaps back to her, sharper than before. A tense silence fills the room, and Hinata fidgets slightly, wondering what she may have said wrong. Naruto. Hayashi's voice is low, laced with a harsh edge. His expression darkens, a glint of disapproval hardening his gaze. So, Hokage-sama has chosen to release him. Foolish. Hinata's voice is barely a whisper. Father, why was Naruto imprisoned? Hayashi's face tightens, as though repelled by the very idea of discussing Aizen. That is not a matter you need concern yourself with. She lowers her head, confused but unwilling to press further. Without another word, Hayashi turns and exits, his footsteps echoing down the corridor as he strides off, clearly intent on confronting the Hokage about this decision. The morning sun was just beginning to peek through the trees at Training Ground 7 when Hinata and Shino arrived, only to find Aizen already there, seated in perfect stillness, his legs crossed in a meditative stance. His eyes remained closed, and his breath was so steady that he seemed like part of the landscape. They exchanged glances, choosing not to disturb him, and quietly settled in nearby to wait for Kakashi. 3 hours later, Kakashi finally appeared, strolling in with his usual nonchalance. But Aizen's left eye opened the moment Kakashi entered, and an unmistakable look of disapproval flashed across it. There was no need for words to convey the displeasure. You'll refrain from being late again? Aizen's voice was calm, but cold enough to raise the hair on Kakashi's neck. Or I will personally make sure you face consequences. Kakashi's usual easygoing demeanor faltered for a split second as he felt an invisible pressure settle over him. He forced a laugh, scratching the back of his head as though to brush off the threat. Right, punctuality, understood. But his unease lingered, knowing that for Aizen, such words weren't spoken lightly. The team made their way to the Hokage's office, with Kakashi leading and Aizen walking at a measured, almost regal pace behind him, Hinata and Shino following. When they entered, Hiruzen looked up, his gaze landing on Aizen. Though the third Hokage's face remained composed, an unmistakable flicker of unease passed over his features. Irika, standing beside him, shifted uncomfortably as well, unable to shake the unsettling aura that Aizen exuded, even when he was simply standing there in silence. Hiruzen gathered himself, clearing his throat. "Today, Team 7 will undertake a D-rank mission," he announced. "A basic assignment. You'll be helping with local chores," and Aizen didn't wait to hear the rest of the details. Without a word, he turned his back on the Hokage and strode out of the office, leaving the others in stunned silence. Shino and Hinata looked at Kakashi for direction, but he only sighed, scratching his head. "Well, I figured this might happen," Kakashi muttered. With an ego like his, he'd never be satisfied with mundane tasks. He waved for the others to follow, prepared to carry on as best they could without Aizen. Next day, in the council chambers, a heavy silence hung over the room as Konoha's advisors gathered. The meeting had been called to discuss Aizen's recent release, and tension was already high. Koharu's face was set in a frown as she leaned forward. "This is a mistake," she began, her voice thick with disapproval. "His presence here is dangerous, Hiruzen. After everything, how could you risk allowing that boy to walk freely again?" Hamura nodded in agreement. "The villagers have not forgotten. Many still fear him." Across the table, Hayashi and Choza sat silently, their expressions grim. Finally, Hayashi spoke, his tone cold. "I don't see how freeing him benefits the village. If the boy tries again, it won't just be villagers who suffer. It will be all of Konoha." Shikaku, who had remained quiet until now, sighed, rubbing his temples as he glanced at his peers. "We may not like it, but we need him," he said, his tone measured. "With Naruto back in the village, we regain something that we've lost." Hiruzen nodded in agreement, leaning forward as he shared Jiraiya's latest report. The intelligence Jiraiya gathered points to a troubling reality. Naruto's absence, his containment, has emboldened the other nations. They've been weighing the possibility of war, looking for signs of weakness in Konoha. He glanced around the room, ensuring each council member understood the gravity of the situation. "With his return, we are no longer defenseless." Danzo leaned forward, his lone visible eye narrowed. "Can we be certain that he won't turn against us, Hiruzen?" His voice was low, cutting through the quiet like a blade. "That boy has no loyalty to the village. How can we be sure he won't decide to betray us the moment it suits him?" Hiruzen's gaze hardened slightly. "We can't be sure, but consider this," he replied. "If Naruto wanted to leave, he would have escaped years ago. Every layer of security we placed around him, he overcame them all. He stayed only because he chose to. That speaks for itself." A tense silence settled over the council, and Shikaku shifted uncomfortably, understanding that there was no simple solution. Koharu's lips pressed into a thin line as she glanced at Hiruzen. "We're playing a dangerous game, Hiruzen. We may end up paying dearly for this decision." But Hiruzen only closed his eyes, his expression one of deep resignation. "Perhaps," he murmured, "but we're already paying for our past decisions. We must simply make the best of the hand we've dealt ourselves." A sinister meeting. Hiruzen made his way to Aizen's cell, his expression troubled. He was met with Aizen's calm, unreadable gaze. Hiruzen escorted him to the abandoned Senju clan compound. Aizen arched an eyebrow. "The Senju compound?" His gaze flicked over Hiruzen, a hint of amusement in his voice. "Up to standard, I guess?" As they walked, Aizen's faint smirk grew more pronounced. "Had you given me a rundown apartment, Hiruzen, I might have been tempted to start a slaughter." The Hokage chuckled, though it sounded more like a nervous sputter. He did consider it, for just a moment. His eyes flickered with tension, realizing how serious Aizen might have been. 2 weeks later, in Aizen's absence, Team 7 had been completing D-rank missions one after another. Today, however, Kakashi arrived at the training ground, where his team was waiting with eager expressions. "Congratulations," Kakashi announced, pulling out the mission scroll. "We've been assigned a C rank, scouting the borders for signs of bandit activity." Team 7 met up with Teams 8 and 10 at Konoha's main gate. The genin buzzed with anticipation, though their attention quickly shifted when Aizen arrived, standing with an air of nonchalance, his lone visible eye surveying the group. Kurenai and Asuma couldn't hide the tension that surged as they glanced at Aizen. Kurenai's gaze lingered a second longer. Despite her wariness, she felt a strange fascination, an appreciation for the dark precision in his eyes that were said to wield illusions more potent than any shinobi. Kiba, unfazed, grinned and nudged his teammates. "What's with the eye patch? Wait, let me guess, you're hiding some forbidden dark power behind that thing, right?" Kurenai and Asuma visibly stiffened, fully aware of what had happened to those who dared insult Aizen. But Aizen's response surprised them. His smirk widened, and he leaned toward Kiba, voice playful yet laced with an unsettling chill. "Something like that," he said smoothly. Several genin stared, dumbfounded, and Ino's cheeks flushed as she nudged Shikamaru. "Who is he?" she whispered, her voice a little breathy. Shikamaru rolled his eyes, muttering under his breath. "That's Naruto," he replied, adding with a sigh. Though he prefers Aizen now. The revelation shocked the genin, and Sasuke's eyes narrowed as he studied Aizen, wondering about his disappearance 6 years ago. Kiba, unrelenting, asked, "How'd you even become a ninja? Didn't you drop out of the academy?" Aizen's response was curt. "I was homeschooled by an academy teacher. I passed his test to become a genin." His tone suggested the topic was closed, and when Kiba opened his mouth to speak again, Kakashi intervened. "Everyone ready to move out?" Kakashi prompted, effectively cutting off further questions. As the group began their journey, Ino tried to engage Aizen in casual conversation, while other genin peppered him with questions. Yet, Aizen remained silent, merely letting his enigmatic smile speak volumes. At the border, after hours of scouting, the team stumbled upon a structure hidden in the dense forest. Shikamaru squinted, taking in the stronghold's form. "That's no bandit hideout." As they saw the enemy's headbands, they realized it was an IWA stronghold. Kakashi's expression darkened. "This is serious," he whispered. "We need to return to the village immediately. We're far too close to an IWA operation." Just as they turned, an invisible force prevented their departure, like an unseen barrier blocking every path. Panic seized the genin, and the air grew dense with a sinister aura that sent chills through their bodies, everyone's except Aizen's. The IWA shinobi emerged from the stronghold, coming out to investigate the source of the aura. As they spotted the Konoha shinobi, their eyes turned cold. Asuma tightened his stance, his voice low. "We're outnumbered. There's no way we can win this fight head-on." Aizen's gaze shifted, noticing something, or rather, someone, hidden in the distance. His smirk was wicked, anticipation glinting in his eye. "Running would be so boring, wouldn't it, Shikamaru?" Shikamaru sighed. "You're insane. You realize that, right?" The IWA squad leader's gaze swept over the Konoha shinobi, pausing on Kakashi. Kakashi Hatake, the copycat ninja. The white fang of the Leaf's son. "Come on bro, Tony. Rated a S-class ninja in our bingo books, IWA leader." "Bro, stop Tony. One of the strongest ninja in the Leaf. IWA leader." "Come on bro, Tony. They say with only look with his Sharingan he can steal all your jutsu, and your heart." IWA leader blushed at the last part. "What? Bro must be from the village hidden in the closet. Tony, Iwa's always wanted your head, mostly because of your connection to the Yellow Flash." Another IWA shinobi sneered, his expression venomous. "Minato's little pet. It'll be a pleasure to kill you." Ignoring the hostility, Kakashi's tone was icy. "What's IWA doing on our border?" The IWA leader scoffed. "You don't need to know, Hatake, since you won't live to report it." The genin shuffled nervously, glancing to each other for reassurance. Shikamaru sighed, muttering, "I should have stayed home." Aizen's faint laughter broke through. "You'd have missed all the fun." Shikamaru shot him an incredulous look. "Only you would find this fun." Before anyone could respond, the IWA leader signaled his shinobi to attack. In the blink of an eye, the battlefield was stained red. The IWA shinobi reduced to pieces, their bodies torn asunder by an unseen force. The genin recoiled, nausea swirling in their stomachs, while Shino and Shikamaru, with practiced stoicism, remained steady. Sasuke, however, froze, his breath hitching as traumatic flashes of the Uchiha massacre bombarded his mind. Aizen's eye narrowed, and in one swift motion, he delivered a blow to Sasuke's neck, rendering him unconscious. As the Jonin scrambled to guard the genin, Aizen's gaze pierced the shadows, his voice a calm, lethal whisper. "Come out." From the depths of the forest, a figure emerged. The Jonin paled as they recognized the man. A twisted smile spread across his face. Ryaman Sukuna. After his reincarnation, Sukuna's reputation had grown into a tale of brutality, a killing machine with an insatiable bloodlust. Classified as an S-rank threat, the King of Curses had committed atrocities across the lands, leaving nothing but despair and terror in his wake. Sukuna tilted his head, eyeing the assembled shinobi with a manic grin. "A crowd, how delightful," he sneered, his gaze lingering on Kurenai and the young genin. He licked his lips. "They'll be fun to kill." Kakashi tensed, motioning to the others. "Everyone, find a way to break through the barrier. Asuma and I will hold him off." But before they could act, Aizen stepped forward, the subtle power radiating from him forcing everyone to take a step back. Kakashi hesitated, voice laced with concern. "Naruto, don't." Aizen cast a dismissive glance over his shoulder. "Stay back. I'll handle this." With deadly grace, Aizen walked towards Sukuna, who chuckled, raising a hand and unleashing a series of invisible slashes in Aizen's direction. But the technique merely shredded Aizen's clothing, leaving him unscathed beneath. With a flick of his fingers, Aizen conjured a protective barrier around his allies, securing them from the coming chaos. As he advanced, Sukuna's twisted grin grew. "Finally, someone who might actually be worth my time." His fingers flexed in anticipation, curse energy radiating from his form. Aizen's smirk answered Sukuna's arrogance, an amused glint dancing in his eye as his power began to surge in kind. The air between them thickened, a dangerous, suffocating pressure that even the Jonin could barely withstand. Shikamaru felt his knees shake. "I've never felt anything like this." Kurenai clutched her chest, horror etched across her face. That isn't human." As their auras clashed, pressure and malice intertwining, even Kakashi, seasoned and battle-hardened, felt the sheer, oppressive weight of their powers. A cold sweat ran down his spine, and he muttered to himself, "If this is the beginning, I fear what's coming next." The tension between them was electric, thickening the air like a gathering storm as they stood there, sizing each other up. Aizen, calm and collected, wore his signature faint smirk, as if the situation amused him. Across from him, Sukuna's face twisted into a sadistic smile, excitement flickering in his eyes like a spark catching fire. Suddenly, Sukuna slugged Aizen in the face. The blow cracked against Aizen's face with a force that could have shattered stone, twisting his head to the side. But Aizen simply turned his gaze back, as calm as ever. "Is that all you've got?" he asked, voice tauntingly casual. Sukuna's smirk widened. "I'm just getting started." Then they clashed. Sukuna moved like a storm, fists and feet blurring as he unleashed a relentless onslaught. Each punch and kick had enough force to take down lesser fighters in one blow. But Aizen was unfazed. Aizen's fist shot forward with a terrifying speed. His knuckles connected squarely with Sukuna's chest, the impact reverberating through the ground beneath them. Sukuna staggered back, breath hissing through gritted teeth. But before he could fully recover, Aizen was already upon him, striking with a series of brutal punches that hammered into his body with a rhythm as steady as a heartbeat. Sukuna tried to counter, aiming a vicious uppercut at Aizen's jaw, but Aizen sidestepped, using the momentum of Sukuna's swing to slip under his arm. With lightning speed, he drove his elbow into Sukuna's ribs, the blow making a sickening crunch. Sukuna's face twisted in rage, but Aizen gave him no time to retaliate. He followed up with a rapid barrage of strikes to Sukuna's chest and abdomen, each hit echoing like thunder. Desperation flickered in Sukuna's eyes as he attempted to turn the tide, launching a roundhouse kick aimed at Aizen's temple. But Aizen anticipated it, ducking smoothly beneath Sukuna's leg. In the split second Sukuna was off balance, Aizen spun and slammed his palm into Sukuna's chest, sending him skidding back. Sukuna stumbled, gasping, but his anger only fueled him further. He came at Aizen again, faster, more aggressive, his fists a blur. But Aizen remained unbothered, almost serene. He blocked Sukuna's punches with a casual flick of his wrist, deflecting each blow as if he were swatting away a fly. "You'll need to do better," Aizen remarked, his voice dripping with mockery. Sukuna's eyes blazed with fury, but the truth was clear. Aizen wasn't just countering Sukuna's every move. He was toying with him, dominating the fight with a level of ease that was both infuriating and terrifying. Finally, with one last brutal punch, Aizen drove his fist into Sukuna's stomach, bending him double with a shuddering gasp. Sukuna staggered back, clutching his stomach as he struggled to catch his breath. His sadistic smile now replaced by a glimmer of anger, and perhaps, for the first time, unease. Inside Aizen's barrier, the onlookers could only watch as the battle between Aizen and Sukuna raged on with breathtaking ferocity. The sheer power and finesse Aizen displayed left his audience in stunned silence. A mix of admiration, shock, and disbelief etched across their faces. Asuma, arms folded as he tried to keep his composure, finally broke the silence. How in the world is he able to fight like that? "It's impossible," he muttered, his gaze fixed on Aizen's effortlessly fluid movements. The kid was locked up for 6 years. He should be rusty, weaker, not this, he thought. Kiba let out a low whistle, his eyes wide. "Amazing," he breathed, more to himself than anyone else. Ino, meanwhile, was transfixed. Her usual playful expression melted into one of awe as she watched Aizen. His every move radiated a calm power and unshakable confidence. There was something almost divine about the way he fought, as if he were an untouchable figure dancing through battle. Her cheeks flushed as her eyes practically sparkled with admiration. "He's incredible," she whispered, practically sighing. Shikamaru, on the other hand, couldn't help but let out a sigh. "What a drag," he mumbled, though even he couldn't tear his eyes away from the display. Deep down, he understood that Aizen was something else entirely, a different breed of fighter. Just then, a faint groan sounded from the side as Sasuke stirred, his eyes fluttering open. He blinked as he tried to orient himself, and his gaze quickly sharpened as he took in the sight before him. Aizen was locked in a brutal clash with Sukuna. For a moment, Sasuke was at a loss, struck by the undeniable realization that Aizen was fighting on a level he could barely comprehend. Back on the battlefield, Sukuna slowly pushed himself to his feet, his breathing heavy but his gaze sharper than ever. Aizen watched him with that infuriatingly calm expression, his smirk barely flickering. Sukuna's eyes narrowed as he considered his options, the gears in his mind turning. It was clear now that raw strength alone wasn't enough. He needed to change his approach. "Fine, then," Sukuna growled, the corners of his mouth curling into a wicked grin. "Let's see how you handle this." Without warning, he lunged forward, his hands aglow with curse energy. His hands sliced through the air with deadly intent, the cursed slashes invisible but filled with an almost tangible malice. He struck at Aizen, and as his fist connected, the cursed energy poured into the blow, seeking to carve through his opponent. Aizen barely blinked as the blow landed against him. Sukuna's cleave sliced across his shoulder, drawing a thin line of blood that quickly darkened his robes. But even with the cursed technique's immense cutting power, Aizen didn't flinch, only watching Sukuna with a slight flicker of intrigue. "Interesting," Aizen murmured, his voice low, almost mocking. "You'll need more than that if you wish to even scratch me." Undeterred, Sukuna smirked, launching another attack. His movements were relentless as he channeled cleave with each strike, the cursed slashes igniting the air around them. Each blow should have been enough to slice through Aizen, but every time his attacks met Aizen's form, they only managed shallow cuts, never going as deep as Sukuna intended. Aizen moved with preternatural grace, his body weaving in and out of Sukuna's attacks. Even as cleave made contact, Aizen manipulated his Reiatsu, dulling the technique's edge and exhausting Sukuna's cursed energy. Still, Sukuna kept pressing on, knowing that every slash took more and more of his own strength but refusing to yield. "You're starting to look tired," Aizen observed with a chilling smile, sidestepping another cursed slash. "Perhaps that wasn't the best choice." "Shut up," Sukuna spat, and with a roar of effort, he brought down both arms in a vicious cross-slice aimed at Aizen's chest. Aizen caught the brunt of the attack, and the cursed energy flared wildly around them. For a moment, Aizen's robes tore in several places as Cleave dug in, the cursed energy managing to pierce through his powerful Ryatsu shield. Yet, even as his clothes were marred and his body bore small wounds, Aizen's face remained unchanged, his expression as composed as if he were observing a minor inconvenience. Sukuna took a step back, breathing heavily, his own energy starting to wane. He had poured an extraordinary amount of curse energy into each Cleave strike, but Aizen's sheer endurance and overwhelming Ryatsu seemed to defy reason. Aizen chuckled softly. "Is that really the best you can do with that technique?" Enraged, Sukuna launched at him again, his fists alight with curse energy as he drove another barrage of Cleave-infused punches at Aizen. Each hit was accompanied by a deadly curse slice, the energy cutting through the very ground beneath them as Sukuna tried to hack through Aizen's defenses. But Aizen twisted and moved with impossible grace, parrying each attack, his Ryatsu swelling in a way that seemed to smother Sukuna's cursed energy. Aizen deflected Sukuna's fist, driving his knee up into Sukuna's abdomen. The force sent Sukuna stumbling back, a strangled growl escaping him. But Aizen didn't stop. With a flash of speed, he was on Sukuna again, his palm striking Sukuna's chest and sending him crashing into the ground with bone-jarring force. Sukuna rose to his feet once more, defiant even as he panted, his arms heavy from exertion. But Aizen tilted his head, regarding Sukuna as though he were a struggling insect. "Cleave, was it?" Aizen said softly, raising an eyebrow. "An amusing technique, but not enough to stop me." Sukuna's face twisted in fury, his cursed energy flaring around him in a blaze of malice. But Aizen simply stepped forward, his smirk widening, his form practically glowing with an aura of calm, unbreakable power. The message was clear. Aizen was in complete control, and despite everything Sukuna had thrown at him, he hadn't even begun to unleash his true strength. Sukuna steadied himself, his narrowed gaze fixed on Aizen as he took a few paces back. Deciding on a new approach, he unleashed blazing Cleave he attack infused with both flames and slashes. With a cruel smile, he flicked his wrist, launching a barrage of flaming slashes through the air, each one crackling with violent energy as it surged toward Aizen. Without a hint of concern, Aizen merely adjusted his stance, exuding an oppressive wave of Ryatsu that rolled outward like a suffocating fog. His spiritual pressure flared, forming a nearly impenetrable shield that caused Sukuna's flaming slashes to fizzle out upon impact, leaving only trails of smoke. Sukuna's smirk faltered momentarily as his attacks failed, though he quickly masked his frustration. "So you think your precious aura will protect you from everything?" Sukuna sneered, determination flashing in his eyes. "Fine, let's see how you fare against a beast." In an instant, he summoned Nu, a massive, terrifying Shikigami. With wings spread wide, Nu let out a thunderous cry as it took to the sky, looming overhead like an omen. Sparks danced around its form before it unleashed a torrent of electricity, each bolt as thick as a tree trunk and crackling with a menacing hum as it rained down upon Aizen. The strikes hit Aizen's form relentlessly, filling the air with deafening booms and blinding flashes of light. However, as the electrical onslaught subsided, Aizen stood unharmed, the potent lightning absorbed by his relentless Ryatsu. Not a hair was out of place, and his calm, unbothered expression remained. A low growl escaped Sukuna's throat, his patience wearing thin as he channeled a different technique. He extended his arms, his hands beginning to glow with a faint, undulating light as water gathered between his palms. Sukuna focused, compressing the water into a hyper-concentrated, high-pressure beam. His gaze sharpened as he aimed carefully, allowing a wicked grin to spread across his face before he unleashed it in a fierce torrent. The beam hurtled toward Aizen, the pressure behind it tearing through the air with a high-pitched whine. Yet, before it could even come close, Aizen's Ryatsu once again surged, deflecting the water's path as it curved around him harmlessly, splitting into mist upon contact with his spiritual pressure. Sukuna clenched his jaw, visibly furious now. He had been holding back some of his abilities, choosing to toy with Aizen, but each failed attempt only served to fuel his anger. Aizen, sensing Sukuna's growing frustration, let out a faint sigh, almost as if bored. Raising his hand in a slow, deliberate motion, he began to channel his own power, his Ryatsu building to a palpable crescendo. His voice rang out with an eerie calm as he intoned, "Hado number 90, Kurohitsuji." Instantly, the atmosphere darkened as an enormous, black box materialized around Sukuna. It loomed ominously, its surface glinting with sharp, otherworldly edges, as if constructed from the very fabric of darkness. Sukuna's eyes widened as he felt an intense gravitational force press down on him, crushing him from every angle, making his bones creak under the pressure. And then came the spears. Hundreds of piercing spikes erupted from every side within the box, stabbing through Sukuna with relentless precision. He roared in pain, his voice echoing within the confines of the Kurohitsuji. The darkness seemed to absorb the sound, leaving only the deadly, silent strikes of each spear plunging into him. When the spell finally faded, the black box vanished, and Sukuna lay sprawled on the ground, his body riddled with holes, blood pooling around him. His breath was shallow, his form battered. Above him, Aizen watched with a detached gaze, hardly sparing a glance at Nu, who still hovered above, futilely continuing its assault. But before Aizen could turn his attention away, Sukuna's body began to twitch, his muscles knitting themselves back together as he activated his reverse curse technique. The gaping wounds sealed shut, his flesh regrowing as the blood was reabsorbed into his body, leaving him whole once more. A cold, amused laugh escaped his lips as he slowly rose, brushing the dust from his shoulders. "No more, Mr. Nice Guy," Sukuna snarled, his gaze cold and lethal. A dark aura of cursed energy flared around him, growing denser with each passing moment. It's time to get serious. I hope you guys like the story. Comment down below when you want the next part. Do let me know your thoughts in the comments. Legacy signing off.